Morning, Julie. Morning.
So much to talk about, Ian. Let's start, if we can, on this issues of the rollout of the booster jabs and indeed the rollout of the jabs to children. We understand the JCVI they definitely approved the idea of a booster jab rollout. First of all, it's just for the most vulnerable. We know the government is very keen and is likely to agree by next week to roll it out to more people. But we've got, at the same time as, it'll be a Pfizer jab, which, of course, billions of pounds is being made on around the world. We've got the head of the AstraZeneca Oxford University jab, Dame Sarah Gilbert, saying that she doesn't believe these booster jabs are necessary to be rolled out, and the evidence isn't clear. People's immunity is lasting for the average person, and that actually it would be much more moral and right to send those jabs to countries with a low vaccine take-up to save the lives of vulnerable people there. Do you think she's right?
Well, I was interested when I heard what she said on the radio. I've been waiting for this powerful information that tells me the booster jab is vital. Because that's exactly what we should be making decisions on, is the balance of evidence that says that we need to have a booster jab. And what I thought today was interesting was that point about, the fact that some don't think, a lot of scientists don't think that there is a necessity for a booster jab because our immunities are pretty good, in fact, very high indeed. That's why we're seeing such a low relative hospitalization and death set of death figures. So I must say, personally, I think that there is a moral issue here too, which is that if we want to stamp out some of these variants, we have to start getting many of those countries in the developing world vaccinated. And the longer we keep clinging on to vaccines, will there be a booster to the booster in February and a booster to the booster to the booster because just in case there's another variant. I mean, this can become, if we're not careful, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my sense is, unless there's overwhelming, clear evidence, then on balance, we should proceed as we are.
The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has just said they are looking at this. They've also been looking at children as young as 12 to 15 getting the jabs. They have decided on the balance of evidence, the balance of benefit and cost, that it's not a good idea to roll these jabs out at the current time on the current evidence. They think the benefit is marginal based on the known benefits and the known risks. They're unable to assess the unknown risk, lots of which, of course, will be long term. We've seen the latest evidence from an American study showing the risk certainly to teenage boys from these jabs for heart inflammation. That is 6 times higher, that risk in teenage boys, than the risk of hospitalisation or serious illness from COVID. We know that up to 60% of young people in this cohort will have already had COVID and have already got antibodies, in which case there's no benefit, certainly with the Delta variant, for them getting the vaccine at all. Yet we're told that the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, who's been asked by the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, to look actually to possibly basically override the JCVI decision, the expert decision, that he is going to, we understand, possibly the next day, possibly the next week, he's going to override that and he's going to support vaccinating teenagers. And the argument will be that it will improve their mental health, their social life and their education, rather than actually provide more protection from COVID than they already have. What do you make of that? Vaccinating children, not to protect their physical health, but their mental health.
Well, again, it's a bit old-fashioned, I suppose, but it does seem to me that the balance of evidence should be how we proceed. And we know that the risks are higher than the benefits of these vaccinations
just for Ofcom reasons, I need to point out the JCVI said the benefits were marginal.
Well, when I say risks are higher, what you're doing is you're taking a risk over doing this, which is outweighed by the nature of who you're vaccinating. That's the point I'm making. And the reality here is that, yes, where a family has somebody who is one of the very high risk categories, and I've had some of those that I've dealt with, then I think that's where the balance of collective risk may say, okay, well, that child should be perhaps vaccinated to protect the adult and themselves. So you balance the whole nature of family. But generally, across the board for children, we were always led to believe that, by and large, children are not at risk from COVID. Younger people are not at risk of COVID as much as the older people are. And so that's what concerns me slightly about this decision. If the JCVI could not reach a conclusive decision about that balance of risks, then it does strike me as strange that this becomes an easy decision to make. And the truth is, I think it's become quite political.
Well,
And
exactly.
that's
If
what
we're
this is
following
all
the
about.
science, then follow the scientific advice. But then we follow the scientific advice unless we don't agree with the scientific advice, and we do it for other reasons. The justification for these jabs for children, it would appear, and for vaccine passports, and we'll come on to that, then the civil liberties issues there, seems to be that that there's sort of that we're going to be forced into restrictions. We're going to be forced to limit children's education, forced to limit people's freedoms, forced to close businesses, do whatever. But that somehow that's going to inevitably happen as COVID cases rise, as hospitalizations, as deaths rise. And that's something that's going to be forced upon us unless we take these measures to mitigate against it. Once again, the government implying that these are decisions that come about automatically because of COVID, as opposed to being, as you say, political decisions. The decision to lock down, to close schools, they've been different in every single country around the world. They are individual decisions. The government needs to take responsibility for that decision rather than blame it on COVID.
Yeah, one of the after effects of COVID, which I don't know one day we'll be able to look at, is how the intense fear that has been generated around COVID has led to a completely broken process of decision making, I think. And so much of what we would normally do is thrown away in process because of COVID. So big decisions that were made earlier on, with the shutting down of large sections of hospitals, meant that many people couldn't get their treatment, and much of that was swept away. But when you talk to people who couldn't get their treatment, cancer patients, etc., people with heart disease, you realize suddenly that the balance has gone out of decision making. And I was intrigued looking at the death figures. The BBC and others continue to report hospitalization and death of COVID. But COVID deaths are about fourth or fifth on the list of deaths from people in the UK. Things like pneumonia, heart disease, cancer are right up, much higher. And the result of all of that is we don't publish those death rates. We don't say today the death rate for heart disease is as follows. And that's because we are completely focused on COVID. And we can't remain like that because it affects our decision making, it affects our rationality, and it creates fear, and often irrational fear. So that makes decision making for individuals very bad and difficult, as you see with this. So my sense is this is the thing that has died for us is what I call sometimes rational decision making and balancing risks and rewards.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, Ken, we were told we were going to learn to live with this virus, and yet we've got vaccine passports on the cards in England from October the 1st for nightclubs and other crowded areas. Lots of people say, "Oh, I don't go to nightclubs." It's going to be for large venues like football matches and concerts as well. It's going to affect an awful lot more people than just nightclubbers. Last night, MSPs in Scotland voted for that. Rather bizarre situation with the MSPs for the Scottish Conservative Party voting against that measure in Scotland, and yet the Conservative Party in government in England is going to push that measure, despite the fact that, of course, that one of the senior government ministers, Michael Gove, a few weeks ago was happily dancing in a nightclub in Aberdeen without need for a vaccine passport and didn't seem to think it was unsafe. What do you make of that?
It very much illustrates the point that I was making just now, which is we no longer appear to be rational in this process. We no longer appear to take decisions that are rationally based, on scientific advice, but at the same time, on what we lose as much as what we're supposed to gain. And that balance is critical to how we live our lives. I always say that, there is risk in everything we do in our lives. When we cross the road, if we don't cross at a zebra crossing, we increase our risk. When we choose to ride motorcycles or bicycles even on the road, we increase our risk, but we balance that against what we think are the advantages of taking those decisions. Otherwise, you'd have to put railings up all along the roads and not allow people to step across. And this is very much where we seem to be. So I'm not in favour, I have to say, of an extension further of passports. I really am not. And I think that it leads to all sorts of complications. For example, is it going to be a criminal offence not to have a vaccine passport if you haven't had 2 jabs? What do you do at the door of the nightclub or the restaurant, or in my case, as a season ticket holder of Tottenham? What do I do when I go there because I've contracted with Tottenham and paid my money, and I'm told I can't come in because it's not a criminal offence, but I haven't got a passport? And this sort of thing really begins to get right to the heart of how we live our lives to some degree freely, recognising there are restrictions generally. But this, what's happening to those who then have to enforce it? And these are the things that nobody seems to have really come to terms with. And I really, really beg my government, just to take a pace back and think very carefully what we lose as much as what they think we might gain.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us, former leader of the Conservative Party.